The morning of March 15th, 2023, at 428 Maple Street, began like any other in the past 7 years. Martin Coleman woke up at 6:15 a.m. to the sound of his alarm clock, turned it off quietly so as not to wake his wife, and headed to the bathroom. In the mirror, he saw a typical middle-aged American man, short cropped brown hair, thinning on top, the sturdy build of a man who earns his living through physical labor, and tired brown eyes that nevertheless retained their kindness. Alexandra was still asleep, wrapped in a blanket so that only her long dark hair was visible, scattered across the pillow. Martin tiptoed past the bed, casting a tender glance at his sleeping wife. Even after 7 years of marriage, he still couldn't believe his luck. When they met at a cafe on Main Street in 2016, Alexandra seemed too beautiful and sophisticated for a simple guy like him. But somehow she agreed to go on a date with him, and then to marry him. Martin went down to the kitchen, turned on the coffee maker, and started making breakfast. The usual routine: eggs, bacon, toast. Nothing special, but Alexandra always said she liked his breakfasts more than the food at expensive restaurants. Half an hour later, she came downstairs, already dressed for work in a strict gray suit that emphasized her slender figure. "Good morning, dear," she said, hugging him around the neck and kissing him on the cheek. Her voice was soft, slightly hoarse in the morning. "How did you sleep?" "Like a log," Martin laughed, handing her a plate. "How about you? Those nightmares again?" Alexandra froze for a moment, holding her fork over her scrambled eggs. Her sleep had been restless for the past few months. She often woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, but refused to talk about her dreams. "No, everything's fine. I'm just tired from work. We're going through a very busy period at the company right now." Martin nodded, not pressing the issue. Alexandra worked as an administrative coordinator at Midwest Insurance, the largest insurance company in town, and he knew that spring was always a busy time due to tax returns and new policies. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence, occasionally exchanging comments about their plans for the day. Martin had to inspect a new project, the renovation of an old warehouse into an office center. His small construction company, Coleman Construction, was growing slowly but steadily, and projects like this could keep his crew busy for several months. At 7:45, Alexandra gathered her purse, touched up her makeup in the mirror by the door, and headed for the door. "See you tonight, honey. Don't forget we're going to Maria's for dinner on Saturday." "I remember," Martin called from the kitchen, finishing the last piece of toast. "Tell Maria that Tom is coming too. He promised to help her with her electricity." "Okay, I love you. I love you too." The door closed with a soft click and the house fell silent. Martin finished his coffee, gathered his tools and documents, and 10 minutes later drove out of the garage in his battered Ford F-150 pickup truck. Springfield was waking up slowly. There were still few cars on the streets, shops were just opening, and school buses were starting their routes. Martin loved this time of day. The city seemed calm and friendly, just as he remembered it from his childhood. Although the population was approaching 170,000, Springfield retained the atmosphere of a small town where people knew their neighbors and greeted each other on the streets. The construction site was located in an industrial area, a 20-minute drive from his home. Martin was one of the first to arrive and walked around the perimeter of the future office center, taking notes in his notebook. The 1960s building needed serious renovation, but the basic structure was solid. The work would take 3 months, maybe 4, if the client decided to add additional rooms. "Good morning, boss." Rick Morrison, Martin's foreman and right-hand man, called out to him. Rick had been with the team for 5 years and had proven himself to be a reliable and experienced professional. "Hi, have you gathered the guys?" "Everyone's here. We're waiting for instructions." The next few hours passed in the usual rhythm, discussing plans, assigning tasks, taking initial measurements, and doing preparatory work. Martin loved this side of his job, turning ideas into reality, creating something tangible with his own hands. Unlike office work, here the results were immediately visible. At noon, he took a break and called Alexandra. "Hi, honey. How's work?" The usual hustle and bustle. "Mr. Johnson is demanding that all corporate client policies be reviewed again. I think I'll be here for another hour." Alexandra's voice sounded tired. "Don't overwork yourself. How about we order pizza tonight?" "Sounds good. See you later." Alexandra hung up the phone and leaned back in her office chair. Around her, the usual office life was in full swing. The clatter of keyboards, phone calls, muffled conversations of colleagues. Her workspace was neatly organized. Stacks of documents lay in neat piles, family photos adorned her monitor, and in the corner of her desk stood a small cactus, a gift from Martin last Christmas. She really loved her job. The attention to detail required by administrative work came easily to her, and communicating with clients was satisfying. Over the course of 7 years, she had earned the respect of her colleagues and the trust of her superiors. No one asked unnecessary questions about her past, and that was exactly what she needed. "Alex, can you come to my office?" called Mr. Johnson, the manager of their department. "Of course." Johnson was a man in his 50s with graying temples and a kind gaze. He treated Alexandra like a daughter and often consulted with her on work matters. "Sit down. I want to discuss a new project with you. We've landed a big contract with a chain of car dealerships, and I need someone reliable to coordinate it." They talked for almost an hour, discussing the details of the upcoming work. Alexandra felt a surge of energy. Projects like this gave her the opportunity to prove herself and possibly qualify for a promotion. The workday flew by. At 6 in the evening, Alexandra gathered her things and headed for the parking lot. On her way home, she stopped at the grocery store for milk and bread and chatted with the cashier, Mrs. Patterson, who always asked how the nice couple from Maple Street was doing. At home, Martin was waiting for her with a pizza he had ordered and a bottle of inexpensive wine. "How was your day?" he asked, hugging her. "Good. Johnson offered me a new project." "That's great. Will you tell me about it over dinner?" They settled into the living room, turned on the TV, and ate dinner slowly, sharing the events of their day. Alexandra told him about the new project, and Martin told her about the problems with renovating the warehouse and his plans to expand the business. "You know, I'm thinking about hiring another person for the office," he said, taking a sip of wine. "There's too much paperwork." "It's the right decision. Your company is growing, and you need help with administrative matters." At 9 o'clock in the evening, Tom Riley, Martin's best friend since childhood, called. "Martin, how are you? Haven't forgotten about Saturday?" "Of course not. Is Maria making her famous chili?" She promised. "And I'll check her wiring." She complains that the light in the bedroom is flickering. Tom worked as an electrician for a municipal company and often helped friends with household problems. He was unmarried, lived alone in an apartment on the other side of town, but considered Martin and Alexandra his family. "How's Alex?" Martin says, "You got a new project at work," Tom said when Alexandra picked up the phone. "Yes, it's very interesting. I'll have to work with car dealers across the state. Sounds serious. Don't forget to take a break." After talking to Tom, the couple watched the news for a while and went to bed around 10. Before going to sleep, Alexandra stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a long time, studying her reflection. Sometimes she was frightened by the thought of how quickly time flies. 7 years ago, it seemed like their wedding was yesterday, but on the other hand, it seemed like they had always been married. "Are you coming?" Martin called from the bedroom. "Yes, I'm coming." She turned off the light in the bathroom and lay down in bed next to her husband. Martin hugged her, and she pressed herself against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. "I love you," he whispered in the dark. "I love you too, dear." But even in the arms of her beloved, Alexandra couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had been with her for the past few months. It was as if somewhere deep down, she knew that this idyll couldn't last forever. 3 weeks had passed since that peaceful March morning, and Martin Coleman couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Not drastically, not immediately noticeable, but definitely changed. Alexandra had become different, more withdrawn, distracted, as if she were constantly thinking about something. The first warning signs appeared at that very Saturday gathering at Maria Vasquez's house. Tom did indeed come to fix the wiring, and Maria prepared her signature chili con carne. Usually, such evenings were spent in a cheerful, relaxed atmosphere. Tom told stories from work, Maria complained about her clients at social services, and Martin and Alexandra shared their plans for the future. But that evening, Alexandra was unusually quiet. She sat on the sofa in Maria's living room, hugging her knees, and only occasionally joined in the conversation. When Tom finished with the electricity and joined the others, he immediately noticed her state. "Alex, you look tired. Is everything okay?" "Yes, just a lot of work," she replied, but her eyes avoided meeting his gaze. Maria and Alexandra disappeared into the kitchen for almost an hour, supposedly preparing dessert and cleaning up after dinner. Martin could hear their muffled voices, but he couldn't make out the words. When they returned, Maria's face was serious, and Alexandra looked even more tense. "What were you whispering about for so long?" Martin asked casually. "Girls' secrets," Maria smiled, but the smile seemed forced. "You know how we like to talk." That night, when they got home, Alexandra immediately went to take a shower, saying she was tired and wanted to go to bed early. Martin sat in the living room for another hour, looking through construction catalogs, but his thoughts kept returning to his wife's strange behavior. The situation did not improve in the following days. Alexandra began to stay late at work more often than usual, citing a new project. Her phone rang constantly, and she answered calls in another room, saying she didn't want to disturb his work. But when Martin accidentally walked in on her talking, Alexandra quickly ended the conversation. On the morning of Wednesday, April 5th, the first serious conflict in a long time occurred. Martin woke up and found that Alexandra was not in bed. Going down to the kitchen, he saw her sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, staring at her phone. "Good morning. How long have you been awake?" "Since 5 in the morning," she replied without looking up. "I couldn't sleep." "Nightmares again?" "No, just thinking about work." Martin poured himself some coffee and sat down next to her. An article was open on her phone screen, but he didn't have time to see what it was about. "Alex, what's going on?" "You've been acting strange for the last few weeks." Alexandra looked up sharply, and something like panic flashed in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "You've become withdrawn, constantly on edge. We hardly talk anymore. Even in bed, you turn away from me." "I'm just tired, Martin. I'm going through a very difficult period at work, but it's not just work, is it?" "What happened at Maria's on Saturday? You were talking about something serious." Alexandra stood up abruptly, almost knocking over her chair. "Nothing special. Maria just asked my advice about one of her clients. Confidentiality, you understand?" "Then why are you so nervous?" "I'm not nervous," she exclaimed, then immediately softened her tone. "I'm sorry. I'm really tired. Maybe we should take a vacation. Go somewhere?" Martin studied her face. The suggestion of a vacation sounded like an attempt to change the subject. "Of course, we can go somewhere. But first, tell me what's bothering you." "Nothing is bothering me." "Alexandra, I'm late for work." She quickly kissed him on the cheek and headed for the door, leaving her coffee and toast untouched. That same day, Tom Riley stopped by Martin's construction site. He often did this during his lunch break, especially when he was working nearby. "How's it going, buddy?" Tom asked, sitting down on a pile of boards. "Fine. Lots of work." "How are things at home?" Martin put down his papers and looked at his friend. Tom had an uncanny ability to sense when people were having problems. "To be honest, not great. Alexandra's been acting strange." "In what way?" "Nervous. Withdrawn." She's always thinking about something, but she won't talk about it. We even had an argument this morning. The first time in months, Tom nodded thoughtfully. I noticed it at Maria's on Saturday, too. She looked worried. What do you think it could be? I don't know, buddy. Maybe it's really problems at work? Or health problems that she's hiding? I've thought about that, too. But she's always been open with me. We've never kept serious things from each other. Sometimes people don't want to worry their loved ones, especially women. They often try to solve everything themselves. Tom stayed for another half hour, and they discussed all kinds of possible reasons for the changes in Alexandra's behavior. But the more they talked, the more anxious Martin became. Meanwhile, Alexandra was indeed at work, but she couldn't concentrate on her documents. Every half hour she checked her phone, read the same news on the internet, and flinched at every unexpected sound. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Maria called her. Can we meet after work? We need to talk. Maria, I can't right now. Alex, it's important. I saw the news from California. Alexandra felt the blood drain from her face. What news? Not over the phone. Let's meet at the cafe on Jefferson Avenue at 6. The rest of the workday passed in a fog. Alexandra mechanically performed her duties, but her thoughts were far away. At 5:30, she claimed to be feeling unwell and left the office. The cafe on Jefferson Avenue was a small, cozy place that was rarely visited by acquaintances. Maria was already waiting for her at a corner table, nervously stirring her coffee. What's wrong? Alexandra asked, sitting down opposite her. Maria took out her tablet and opened a news site. Read this. The headline made Alexandra gasp. Los Angeles journalist investigates people hiding their past in small towns. It's a general article, Maria. It could be about anyone. Read on. The article said that a certain Daniel Clark, an independent journalist, was gathering information about people who had radically changed their lives and moved to small towns in the Midwest. He claimed that some of them were hiding important facts about their past from their spouses and friends. He mentions the state of Missouri, Alex. That's a coincidence. What if it's not? What if he knows about you? Alexandra closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Even if he knows, what can he do? All my documents are in order. I haven't broken any laws. But Martin doesn't know. And he won't find out. No one will ever find out. Maria looked at her friend with pain in her eyes. Alex, 7 years. Don't you think he has a right to know? A right to know what? That I was a different person? That our whole love is based on a lie? No, Maria. Some things are better left in the past. What if he finds out from someone else? He won't. But even as she said the words, Alexandra knew she no longer believed them herself. They sat in the cafe for almost 2 hours, discussing all kinds of possible scenarios. Maria tried to convince Alexandra to tell Martin the truth herself before it was too late. Alexandra stubbornly refused, insisting that their marriage would not withstand such a shock. He loves me for who I am now. The past doesn't matter. It does if it can destroy your life at any moment. When Alexandra finally got home, it was almost 9 o'clock in the evening. Martin met her at the door with a worried look on his face. Where have you been? I was worried. They said at work that you left feeling unwell. I was meeting with Maria. She's having problems with one of her clients. She asked for advice. Martin hugged her and felt how tense her body was. You're shaking. What's wrong? Nothing. It's just cold outside. But it was early April, and the temperature was hovering around 15 degrees Celsius. At dinner, Alexandra barely touched her food. She answered Martin's questions distractedly, constantly checked her phone, and flinched at every sound outside the window. Alex, talk to me. What's going on? Nothing's going on, Martin. I'm just tired. It's not tiredness. You're scared. I can see it. Alexandra abruptly got up from the table. I'm not scared. I just need time to think about some things. What things? About us. About our future. Martin's heart skipped a beat. Our future? What do you mean? Nothing specific. 7 years is a long time. People change. Are you saying you don't love me anymore? No! She almost shouted. No, that's not it. I love you more than life itself. That's why... She stopped mid-sentence. That's why what? Nothing. Forget it. I'm going to take a shower. Martin remained seated at the table, staring at his uneaten dinner. For the first time in 7 years of marriage, he felt that he didn't know his wife. For the first time, he had doubts about their relationship. That night, Alexandra tossed and turned in bed for a long time, and when she finally fell asleep, she woke up 2 hours later from a nightmare. In her dream, someone was chasing her down a long corridor, and no matter how fast she ran, the distance between them did not increase. Waking up in a cold sweat, she quietly got up and went to the bathroom. A pale, exhausted face stared back at her in the mirror. Dark circles under her eyes, trembling hands, lips that she had bitten until they bled without even noticing. What's happening to me? She whispered to her reflection. But deep down, she knew the answer. The past she had so carefully hidden for 7 years was beginning to catch up with her. And the worst part was, she had no idea how to stop it. Returning to the bedroom, she found Martin awake. Are you okay? He asked quietly. Yes, it's just hot. He reached out his hand and she took it, intertwining her fingers with his. Alex, whatever happens, we'll get through it together. You know that, right? Tears welled up in her throat. I know. Then trust me. Tell me what's bothering you. For a few seconds, she felt like she was ready to tell him everything. The whole truth about who she used to be, what she had been through, how much she feared losing him. But then she imagined the look on his face when he found out. She imagined how his gaze would change, how he would distance himself from her, how their 7 years of happiness would collapse in a single second. Just hold me, she whispered. And he held her, unaware that he was holding a person who was slowly crumbling under the weight of her own secrets. The morning of April 20th began with another sleepless night for Alexandra. Martin woke up and found that her side of the bed was unmade. She hadn't gone to sleep at all. Going down to the living room, he found her sitting in an armchair by the window with a cup of cold coffee in her hands. She was looking at the empty street, but her gaze was directed somewhere far away, as if she were trying to see something invisible to him. Martin stopped in the doorway, studying his wife's profile. Over the past month, Alexandra had lost weight. Her cheeks had sunken, and dark circles had formed under her eyes. She resembled a hunted animal, ready to flee at any moment. But flee from what? From whom? Alex, how long have you been sitting here? She flinched so violently that she spilled the rest of her coffee on her robe. Martin moved closer and noticed that her hands were shaking. I don't know, an hour, maybe 2. He sat down on the armrest of the chair and touched her shoulder. Alexandra was cold, as if she had been sitting by an open window all night, even though the window was tightly closed. When he suggested she see a doctor, she stood up abruptly and went into the kitchen. Martin followed her, and then a conversation took place that changed everything. For the first time, Alexandra hinted that she was hiding something serious, something that could destroy their relationship forever. What if you find out something about me that will change your attitude toward me forever? She asked, leaning on the kitchen table. Martin tried to figure out what she was talking about, suggesting various possibilities, from murder to children from a previous marriage. But his wife's reaction was strange. When he jokingly asked if she had killed someone, Alexandra smiled bitterly and replied, Worse. Worse than murder? Martin couldn't believe it. For you, yes. Those words haunted him all day. What could be worse than murder? What secret was the woman with whom he had lived 7 happy years hiding? During his lunch break, he met with Tom and told him about the morning's conversation. His friend listened attentively, nodding occasionally, and suggested something Martin was afraid to even think about. Maybe you should try to find out for yourself? Documents, photographs, something from her past. The idea of rummaging through his wife's personal belongings seemed like a betrayal to Martin, but there was no alternative. Alexandra refused to talk, and the uncertainty was slowly driving him crazy. In the evening, Martin returned home and found a note on the kitchen table. Gone to Maria's. Will be back late. He reheated the leftovers from dinner and tried to watch TV, but he couldn't concentrate. His thoughts kept returning to Alexandra's words. For you, yes. At 9 o'clock in the evening, he went up to the bedroom and, for the first time in 7 years of marriage, began to look through his wife's personal belongings. His heart was pounding like a thief's, even though he was in his own home. Alexandra's wardrobe was neatly organized. Dresses, suits, and blouses hung by color and season. Shelves with sweaters and jeans, rows of shoes at the bottom. Everything was familiar, nothing suspicious. In the dresser, he found underwear, tights, and scarves. In the bottom drawer were jewelry boxes with gifts he had given her for holidays. Next to them was a small wooden box he had never seen before. Martin hesitated for a few minutes, but curiosity won out. Inside the box were old photographs. One showed a girl of about 10 with short, dark hair, another a teenager. The facial features were familiar, but something about them seemed wrong. It was as if it was Alexandra, but at the same time a completely different person. Under the photos, he found an unsigned envelope. His hand reached for it, even though his mind screamed that it was an invasion of privacy. But his wife's words, worse than murder, wouldn't leave him alone. The first document turned his world upside down. Certificate of Sex Reassignment Surgery. Patient, Alexei Vladimirovich Romanov. Date of surgery, June 15, 2015. Martin reread the line several times, not believing his eyes. Then he looked through the rest of the documents with growing horror. Certificates of hormone therapy, psychological reports, doctor's recommendations, all in the name of Alexei Romanov. At the bottom of the envelope was an old passport. A male passport in the name of Alexei Vladimirovich Romanov, with a photo of a young man who was barely recognizable as Alexander. His legs gave way, and Martin sank onto the bed. 7 years. For 7 years, he had lived with a man he knew nothing about. For 7 years, he had loved a woman who was born a man. Every moment of intimacy, every kiss, every embrace, all of it was built on a monstrous deception. Fragments of memories flashed through his mind. How Alexandra always showered alone, never changing in front of him in the first months of their relationship. How she avoided talking about her childhood. How nervous she got when he suggested having children. Now, it all made terrible sense. The sound of the front door opening made him flinch. Alexandra had returned earlier than expected. Martin quickly gathered his documents, but left the envelope on the bed. It was time to talk. He couldn't live in ignorance any longer. Martin, are you home? Her voice came from downstairs. Upstairs, he replied, surprised at how calm his voice sounded. Her footsteps on the stairs seemed deafeningly loud in the nighttime silence of the house. Alexandra climbed slowly, as if sensing that something had changed. Sorry I'm so late. Maria was having problems with... She stopped in the bedroom doorway when she saw him sitting on the bed with the documents in his hands. Her face turned white as chalk. Her eyes widened in horror. Where did you come from? She whispered. I was looking for my headphones in your dresser. I found a box. Alexandra slowly closed the door and leaned against it, as if trying to block the exit, or the entrance. Perhaps she just didn't want the neighbors to hear their conversation. Alexei Vladimirovich Romanov, Martin said, looking at the passport. Is that your real name? She nodded, unable to speak. Tears were already rolling down her cheeks, smearing her carefully applied makeup. What followed could be called a conversation, but it was more like a series of mutual accusations and excuses. Martin shouted about 7 years of deception, about how their whole life had been a lie. Alexandra tried to explain that she had always been a woman, just born in the wrong body. "You're a man," he shouted at one point. "Or you were a man. Hell, I don't even know what to call it. I'm a woman, Martin. I've always been a woman." But he wasn't listening anymore. His mind was racing with thoughts of the children they had planned to have, of the intimacy that now seemed perverse, of what their friends and acquaintances would think when they found out. Alexandra fell to her knees in front of him, begging him to give her a chance to explain. She talked about love, about how their feelings were real, about how she was afraid of losing him. But Martin felt only disgust, toward her, toward himself, toward the whole situation. "For 7 years, you thought I was so narrow-minded that you couldn't tell me the truth," he said, when she fell silent, "because I knew that would be your reaction. And that's why I decided to deceive you." They stood on opposite sides of the room, and Martin could physically feel the gap between them growing. The woman he had loved for 7 years had turned into a stranger. Worse than that, she had turned into someone who had betrayed his trust in the most cruel way possible. When Alexandra asked what would happen next, he answered honestly that he didn't know. But he knew one thing. He could no longer stay in this house, in this bedroom, next to her. "I can't be here right now," he said, heading for the door. "Where are you going?" "To Tom." "I need time to think." Alexandra tried to stop him, begging him not to leave her alone. But Martin had already made up his mind. He needed to get away from here, away from this nightmare, from the woman who turned out to be a man, from the life that turned out to be a lie. "You left me alone for 7 years, he said without turning around. "Alone with lies." He went downstairs, took his car keys, and left the house where he had lived for 7 years, and which now seemed foreign to him. In the rearview mirror, he could see the lighted window of their bedroom, where Alexandra remained with documents scattered across the bed and her hopes for forgiveness shattered. All the way to Tom's house, Martin tried to make sense of what had happened. How was this even possible? How could you live with someone for 7 years and know nothing about them? How could you deceive someone you supposedly loved so cruelly? Tom opened the door after the first ring, as if he hadn't been asleep. Looking at his friend's face, he immediately understood that something serious had happened. "Come in. Tell me over a beer." And Martin told him everything about the documents he found, about his conversation with Alexandra, about the horror he felt when he learned the truth. Tom listened silently, only occasionally shaking his head. "Damn, buddy, I thought she was having an affair or had drug problems. But this is the worst thing I could have imagined." They sat until morning, discussing the situation. Tom tried to be objective, saying that Alexandra might have really loved Martin and was just afraid of losing him. But Martin felt only pain and anger. "She stole 7 years of my life, Tom. I lived in an illusion for 7 years. What now? Are you going back home?" Martin shook his head. There was nowhere to go back to. The house on Maple Street was no longer his home. The woman he loved no longer existed. Perhaps she never had. He lay down on the sofa in Tom's living room, but sleep would not come. The same thoughts kept running through his head. Deception, betrayal, shattered dreams of children, of the future, of what they would build together. Everything had collapsed in an instant, and he didn't know how to go on living. The shot rang out at 2:47 a.m. The sound shattered the silence of the residential neighborhood on Maple Street, waking the neighbors and setting off dogs barking within a 3-block radius. Mrs. Parker from across the street jumped out of bed, her heart pounding so loudly that it drowned out all other sounds. She waited for another shot, but the silence was even more frightening than the sound. At 428 Maple Street, only one window was lit, the bedroom window on the second floor. A shadow darted past the window, then the light went out. A few minutes later, the front door opened quietly and closed just as quietly. Mrs. Parker waited another half hour before dialing 911. In her 70 years of life, she had learned not to stick her nose into other people's business. But gunshots in the middle of the night in a quiet neighborhood were no longer a private matter for the neighbors. Emergency services, what's the problem? I heard a gunshot. It seems to be at the Coleman house at 428 Maple Street. 8 minutes later, the first patrol car arrived at the house. Officer James McConnell and his partner, Officer Sarah Thompson, cautiously approached the front door. The house looked normal. A neat lawn, Alexandra's red Honda Accord parked in the driveway, the blinds closed on the windows. McConnell knocked on the door. "Springfield Police, open the door." There was no response. Thompson walked around the house, checking the back door and the first-floor windows. Everything was locked, but the living room light was on. "The door isn't locked," McConnell reported, carefully turning the handle. They entered with their weapons at the ready. The living room looked normal, furniture in place, no signs of a struggle or break-in. There was a note on the kitchen table. "Gone to Maria's. We'll be back late." The handwriting was feminine and neat. Upstairs, McConnell nodded toward the stairs. They climbed slowly, listening to every sound. There were 3 rooms on the second floor, a bedroom, a bathroom, and a small study. The bedroom door was ajar. What they saw made Thompson turn away and swallow the nausea that rose in his throat. Alexandra Coleman was lying on the floor next to the bed. Her long, dark hair was scattered across the carpet. Her eyes were open and staring at the ceiling. The bullet entry wound was in the center of her chest, and a dark stain of blood was spreading across her white nightgown. "Call the crime scene investigators and detectives," McConnell said, trying not to disturb the crime scene, "and the coroner." Detective Robert Henderson arrived 20 minutes later. At 45, he had seen many murders, but domestic violence always affected him particularly painfully. Something about the atmosphere of a family home turned into a crime scene made him feel heavy. Henderson was a tall man with graying temples and tired gray eyes. 20 years on the force had taught him to read a crime scene like an open book, but this story remained a mystery to him. "What do we have?" he asked McConnell. Alexandra Coleman, 32 years old. 1 shot to the chest, most likely from close range. Neighbors heard a gunshot around 3 in the morning. The door was unlocked, no signs of forced entry. Henderson examined the body without touching it. Alexandra was dressed in a white nightgown and robe. Her feet were bare, her face streaked with dried tears and smeared makeup. There were some documents on the bedside table. "Where's her husband?" "We don't know yet. His car is gone, and neighbors say he left last night." Forensic experts had already begun their work. A photographer took pictures from different angles. Technicians collected fingerprints and searched for traces of gunpowder. The coroner preliminarily estimated the time of death to be between 2 and 3 in the morning. Henderson walked over to the bedside table and carefully examined the scattered documents. Medical reports, old photographs, a passport in the name of Alexei Romanov. The detective frowned. The case was getting more interesting. "Find her husband," he ordered McConnell, "and find out what these documents are." By morning, the entire street was cordoned off with police tape. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalks, discussing what had happened in hushed voices. Mrs. Parker was being interviewed by a local reporter, recounting how she had heard the gunshot. "They seemed like such a happy couple," she repeated. "Married for 7 years, never had a fight. Who would have thought?" Martin Coleman was found at his friend Tom Riley's house on Oakley Street. Henderson and Officer Thompson arrived there at 8 in the morning. Tom opened the door in his pajamas and bathrobe, his eyes still sleepy. "Mr. Riley? I'm Detective Henderson, Springfield Police. We need to talk to Martin Coleman." Tom's face immediately became serious. "What happened? Can we come in?" Martin was sitting on the sofa in the living room, wearing the same clothes he had worn the day before. He hadn't been sleeping. His red eyes and haggard face made that clear. When he saw the police officers, he immediately understood that something terrible had happened. "Mr. Coleman, I have bad news. Your wife was found dead in your home this morning." Martin was silent for a few seconds, as if he didn't understand the words. Then his face contorted with pain. "How?" "She was shot. I need to ask you a few questions." What followed could be called an interrogation, but Henderson was tactful. Martin told him about the argument the night before, about how he had learned the truth about his wife's past and couldn't accept it. He spoke incoherently, pausing frequently to wipe away tears. "What time did you leave the house?" "Around 10 o'clock. "And you didn't return?" "No. I spent the night here at Tom's." Tom confirmed his friend's alibi. They sat up until morning discussing the situation. Then Martin lay down on the sofa, but did not sleep. "Mr. Coleman, do you have a weapon?" Martin nodded. "A gun in the safe at home. I have a license." Henderson wrote down all the details. The motive was obvious: infidelity and deception discovered on the eve of the murder. The opportunity: the husband knew where the weapon was kept and had the keys to the house. The alibi has not yet been fully verified. After the first interrogation, Martin went to the police station to give more detailed testimony. Henderson studied him carefully. Was this the behavior of a man who had lost his wife, or the skillful act of a murderer? "Tell me about your marriage. Did you have any serious conflicts before?" "Never. We were happy for 7 years. Until yesterday, I considered our marriage perfect." "What changed yesterday?" Martin told him about the documents he found and the shock he experienced when he learned the truth. Henderson listened attentively, taking notes. "Were you angry with your wife?" "Of course I was angry. 7 years of deception. But I would never have thought of hurting her. Nevertheless, you left the house in a rage." "I left because I couldn't be near her. I needed time to think things through." While Martin was giving his statement, other detectives were interviewing the neighbors. A contradictory picture emerged. Everyone described the Colemans as a quiet, happy couple. No one had ever heard any shouting or arguments. Mrs. Parker said she saw Martin leave the night before and then saw the light in the bedroom until late at night. "Did you see anyone after the shot?" "Someone came out of the house and left. I couldn't see who it was. It was dark. Forensic experts found Martin's fingerprints on the gun safe in the house, but that was to be expected. He had lived there for 7 years. The murder weapon, a Glock 19 pistol, was lying on the floor next to the body. Ballistic tests confirmed that the shot had been fired from that particular weapon. What was strange was that there were no clear fingerprints on the gun. It was as if it had been wiped clean after use. By evening, Henderson had interviewed all the key witnesses. Maria Vasquez, the victim's best friend, said that Alexandra had been very nervous in recent weeks, afraid that her husband would find out about her past. She said Martin wouldn't be able to accept it, that he was a very conservative man. "Did you know about her secret?" "Of course I did. We had been friends for 5 years. She trusted me. I advised her to tell her husband the truth, but she was afraid." "Do you think Martin could have killed her?" Maria paused for a long time. "I saw him last night. He was in shock, angry, confused. But a murderer? I don't know. People are capable of many things when they find out they've been betrayed." Tom Riley confirmed Martin's alibi, but Henderson noticed some uncertainty in his testimony. "Martin was with me all night?" "Yes, of course. We talked until morning. He didn't leave the house?" "No, I mean, maybe to go to the bathroom or smoke on the porch. But not for long. How long does it take to drive from your house to Maple Street?" 15 minutes. "But why are you asking?" Martin couldn't have. Henderson didn't answer the question. The evidence was still contradictory. The motive was strong. The opportunity was there, but the alibi still held. Although Tom's testimony did not rule out the possibility that Martin could have left the house briefly. At the station, the detective studied the medical records found at the crime scene. Alexandra's story was complicated: a sex change in California, a move to Missouri, the creation of a new identity. For some people, such a discovery could be motive enough for murder. By the end of the day, there were many questions and few answers in the case. Henderson compiled a list of suspects. At the top was the husband, who had a strong motive and the opportunity to commit the crime, but also had an alibi. There were no other obvious suspects yet. Alexandra Coleman had no enemies. She was respected at work, and her neighbors spoke highly of her. The only person who had a reason to be angry was Martin. But something about the case bothered the detective. It was too obvious. An enraged husband who discovered his wife's infidelity kills her in a fit of rage. But then why was the weapon wiped clean? This suggested premeditation rather than a spontaneous murder in the heat of the moment. Henderson decided to dig deeper. The next day, he planned to re-interview all the witnesses, check their alibis more thoroughly, and examine the couple's financial records. Perhaps the motive was not only infidelity, but something else as well. Alexandra's body was taken to the morgue for an autopsy. The house on Maple Street was sealed off as a crime scene. The neighbors discussed the incident for a long time, speculating about what could have happened in the quiet Coleman family. Martin stayed overnight at Tom's house, but sleep eluded him. He sat by the window, staring into the darkness, trying to understand how their 7-year love story had ended with a gunshot to the chest. Even after learning the truth about his wife, he did not wish her dead. Now he felt guilty. Perhaps if he had stayed home and tried to talk calmly, the tragedy could have been avoided. The second day of the investigation began with an unexpected discovery. Forensic investigators, carefully examining the house on Maple Street, found a bloody rag and rubber gloves in the kitchen trash can. Blood analysis showed that it was the victim's blood. Detective Henderson studied the new evidence in his office, comparing it with witness statements. The picture was beginning to clear up, but not in Martin Coleman's favor. A second interview with Tom Riley yielded more information than the detective had expected. Under pressure from the questions, Tom began to doubt his testimony. "Are you sure Martin didn't leave your house during the night?" "I thought I was sure. But to be honest, I fell asleep around 4 in the morning. And Martin was still sitting in the living room. So between 2 and 4 in the morning, you didn't know where he was." Tom paused, realizing that his testimony could harm his friend. "Technically, yes. But why would he come home?" He was furious with his wife. It was this fact that alarmed Henderson. Strong emotions could lead to unpredictable actions. The examination showed that the shot was fired from a distance of about 1 meter. It was not an accidental shot. The killer had aimed. There were no signs of a struggle on the victim's body, which suggested that Alexandra knew the shooter and did not expect an attack. Neighbor Mrs. Parker gave more detailed testimony about what she saw after the shot. The man left the house through the front door. He had a masculine, confident gait. He didn't run. He walked normally, as if nothing had happened. "Can you describe his appearance?" "It was dark, but he was of average height and build. He may have been wearing a cap or hood." Henderson asked her to look at a photo of Martin. Mrs. Parker studied the photo for a long time. "He looks similar. Very similar in height and build." The next important step was to check the phone records. In the operator's records, the detective discovered that at 2:30 a.m., a call had been made from Alexandra's phone to Martin's cell phone. The conversation lasted 3 minutes. When Henderson told Martin about this, he was confused. "She called me? I don't remember any call." "Check your phone." Martin took out his cell phone and reviewed his call log. The incoming call from Alexandra was indeed recorded at 2:30 a.m. "That's strange. I didn't hear it ring. My phone must have been on silent." "Or you weren't at Tom Riley's house, but talking to your wife at home." Martin categorically denied this, but the detective saw the growing panic in his eyes. The evidence was piling up against him. The decisive evidence was the analysis of DNA found under the victim's fingernails. The examination showed that it was Martin Coleman's biomaterial. Perhaps Alexandra scratched the killer during the struggle, although there were no serious signs of a struggle at the crime scene. On the third day of the investigation, Henderson obtained an arrest warrant. Martin was taken from Tom's house early in the morning while he was drinking coffee in the kitchen and reading newspaper articles about his wife's death. Martin Coleman, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Alexandra Coleman. You have the right to remain silent. Tom watched in horror, unable to believe that his best friend could be a murderer. But the evidence spoke for itself. At the police station, Martin initially continued to deny his guilt. He insisted that he had spent the whole night at Tom's house, that he had not returned home, and that he would never have harmed Alexandra, despite the shock of learning the truth. But when the detective presented him with all the evidence that had been gathered, the phone call, the DNA under the victim's fingernails, the neighbor's testimony, the blood-stained rag, Martin's psychological defenses began to crumble. Martin, we know you went home that night. Alexandra called you and you came over. What happened next? A long silence. Martin sat in the chair with his head down, his hands clenched into fists. Finally, he spoke, his voice trembling. She called and cried. She said she loved me and couldn't live without me. She asked me to come home and talk, and you went back. Yes, I thought we could discuss everything calmly, that we would find some kind of solution. Henderson wrote down every word. After several hours of silence, the suspect finally began to tell the truth. When I got home, she was waiting for me in the bedroom. She was sitting on the bed in the same robe, with the same documents next to her. She tried to explain that she had always been a woman, that the operation had simply corrected nature's mistake. How did you feel? Disgust. I know it's wrong, but I couldn't get along with myself. I lived with a man for 7 years. All our kisses, hugs, intimacy, it was all a lie. Martin fell silent, remembering that night. She came up to me, wanting to hug me. And then I saw not a woman, but a man in a woman's dress. My mind went blank. Did you take the gun? I don't remember how I took it. I only remember that she looked at me with horror and said, Martin, don't do it. I love you. Tears ran down Martin's cheeks. 20 years of police experience had taught Henderson to recognize sincere remorse, and now he saw it. Was there one shot? One. She fell right away. I stood there looking at the blood, not understanding what I had done. Then, as if in a fog, I put the gun away and wiped the blood from my hands. I don't remember the details. Why did you go back to Tom? I don't know. I guess I wanted to pretend that nothing had happened, that it was a bad dream. Martin's confession was recorded and signed. The next day, he was charged with first-degree murder. His lawyer tried to get the charges reduced, citing emotional distress and psychological shock, but the prosecution insisted on full responsibility. The trial began 4 months later. Maria Vasquez testified as a witness, recounting Alexandra's fears and how she dreaded her husband's reaction. She told me that Martin was a very conservative man, that for him, it would be the end of the world. Tom Riley reluctantly confirmed that his friend's alibi was incomplete. I thought I was protecting him. I didn't believe he was capable of murder. The defense tried to present the case as a crime of passion. An expert psychiatrist explained to the jury that for some people, such a discovery about their spouse could be a serious psychological trauma. The defendant was in a state of acute stress. His worldview collapsed overnight, but the prosecutor insisted that the murder was premeditated. Martin returned home with a gun, deliberately shot his wife, and then tried to hide the evidence. The jury deliberated for 2 days. The verdict was unanimous: guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced Martin Coleman to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. In passing sentence, he said, "No matter how shocked the defendant may have been, nothing justifies taking a person's life." Alexandra Coleman had a right to happiness and safety in her own home. Martin listened to the sentence standing, without saying a word. Maria cried in the courtroom, having hoped until the end for justice for her deceased friend. A year after the tragedy, the house on Maple Street was sold. The new owners were unaware of its dark history. Tom Riley moved to another state. The memories of his best friend becoming a murderer were too painful. Maria Vasquez continued to work as a social worker, but now specialized in helping transgender people. In memory of Alexander, she created a small fund to support those who struggled to accept their identity. Martin was serving his sentence in a Missouri state prison. He spent the first few months in solitary confinement of his own volition, not communicating with other inmates. Gradually, he began attending group therapy sessions, trying to understand how he had come to murder the person he once loved. The story of Martin and Alexandra Coleman serves as a warning about how secrets from the past can destroy even the strongest love, and how prejudice can turn a loving person into a murderer. In the quiet suburbs of Springfield, people long remembered the night when a gunshot shattered not only the silence, but also the illusion that 7 years of happiness could protect them from tragedy.